Let's talk about things going on in the United Kingdom, because a council library has refused to put up a sign saying no to the Taliban because it wants neutrality. Neutrality with who? With terrorists? What are you doing? What are you talking about? This was basically a group of women who wanted to have a sort of a get-together, a sort of, what are they called when people go quiet? I've lost that word. When people go quiet in memory of something. Come on, work with me. What is that word? It's gone. Anyway, you know what it is. You're shouting at your radio or your telly right now, and I've forgotten it. It's just gone. Vigil. I was looking for the word vigil. They wanted to have a vigil in memory of the poor women in Afghanistan who are not allowed to talk, not allowed to move, not allowed to leave the house for fear of being stoned to death. And so wanted to advertise this event. And the library said, no, we can't have that. Sorry, we've got to remain neutral. What, neutral? Who? To people who want to bludgeon women for talking? What are you doing? Then at the same time, they had this really ghoulish, harrowing exhibition all about trans joy, where they were showing people with their boobs chopped off and, you know, needles full of puberty blockers, you know, get all the weirdo men into women's toilets. I'll tell you what the neutrality is. It's not neutrality at all. It seems to be taking the side of misogynists. Let's speak to Jo Bartosch, who's assistant editor at The Critic. Jo, where's morality gone? It's not just common sense, it's basic morality. How on earth you can say don't do a vigil for women who are facing the worst possible conditions imaginable in Afghanistan, but let's have big posters up encouraging young girls to want to question their bodies and mutilate themselves?
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain irony, isn't there, in that I'm sure the Taliban know who to oppress. They know what women are. They know what we are. Whereas, obviously, these idiots at the library who claim they had to be neutral. I mean, I hate to use the Nazi analogy, but it's a bit like saying you want to be, you know, unbiased about the Nazis. I mean, the Taliban are unequivocally evil. What they are doing, they have enslaved their population, they have terrorized women, they are just the most dreadful regime. And to suggest that you have to be in any way neutral with people who are sort of morally just wrong is quite astounding. I believe this library, the Trans Joy event that they put on, I think that was I don't think it's necessarily ongoing at the moment, but certainly it's a pattern that we've seen replicated across the country, that libraries in particular, you know, the custodians of our knowledge, you know, where education, you think apart from anything else, the Taliban have banned education for women. This should be an issue that really resonates with librarians. And yet there really does seem to be a problem with sort of woke ideology within libraries.
Right, and the point is this, the trans movement, by and large, is a terrible thing for women. A lot of these pictures that were put up in this exhibition, there was one with the tagline saying self-made men. There is so much focus especially on, by and large, gender dysphoria as a condition, which is a psychological condition, does exist, but it happens in a very tiny percentage of the population. Now, of that tiny percentage of the population, the vast majority of those people who are gender dysphoric are men. It's predominantly male condition. And yet all the energy and effort at the moment seems to be trying to encourage young girls to have mastectomies, young girls to want to be men, girls who by and large don't tend to suffer from gender dysphoria at all. And yet the thing that a lot of teenage girls do suffer from is the sort of sense of communal hysteria, so to speak. They're far more easily influenced and wanting to belong to movements, frankly, than men are. So at the same time, you've got, you know, this encouragement for girls to irreparably damage their bodies, their fertility, this whole promotion of getting sort of weird fetishy men into women's spaces, and then saying when it comes to something that actually is pro-women, a vigil for women being persecuted, don't do it. It's misogyny on steroids.
Yeah, absolutely. Or deep misogyny on hormones.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, when it comes to, I think, both the reasons that men and women transition, they tend to be, well, I don't think there's any such thing as transition, but why they try and appear as the opposite sex, there tend to be very different motivators for it. And we often see that it's older men who have had their own families, who then decide in middle age they want to identify as women. I think quite often it's downstream of pornography. And I think actually the same is true for young women who choose to identify as boys. I think sometimes it's just a way to escape sexism. And when you look into their backgrounds, you find a lot of them are traumatized, a lot of them are autistic, a lot of them have suffered abuse. So I think actually, you know, there is the driver of both of these manifestations, if you like, is quite often pornographic, actually. I think that's something that's not really spoken about very much, but it's a fetish for men, and it's a way of escaping womanhood for girls.
Yeah, do you know, I've often said this myself. It's a hypersexualization of society where once upon a time, you know, yes, there's always been the Marilyn Monroes of this world, but at least she could just about sing and act. You know, she in theory had talents. Whereas now young girls, what's being promoted to them is you don't have to do anything. You know, you can just make money being an OnlyFans model, essentially. Yeah. And even, you know, I don't know any of them personally, of course I don't, but the Kardashians, they're essentially just made on a surgical table, aren't they, for the male gaze? And they don't do anything, they don't act, they don't sing. And increasingly, women are essentially being told, if you want to be, what women's liberation is all about today, what empowerment is all about, is essentially prostituting yourself. That is the message we're giving to young women. And like you said, a lot of women are trying to escape that. Yet why aren't we talking about the really horrific impact of especially user-generated pornography on society? It's something I've tried to campaign about for a long time, and no one's really picking up on this thread. And I think it's absolutely crazy. It's so damaging.
Yeah, well, I mean, as it happens, I'm co-authoring a book on it at the moment, looking at the sort of the impact of pornography on a social level as well as an individual level. And that's sort of why I've come to realise, particularly, that there is such a strong connection between transgenderism as a movement and the pornography industry. And it's true, you know, you look at like Kim Petras, for example. He was a young man who had his puberty blocked as a child, and he's now gone on to become a sort of hypersexualised pop star. And I think for a lot of these men, the idea of what it is to be a woman is essentially to be a sort of pornographic stereotype.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, do you know what? I often say when you see some of these sort of trans male influencers, the Dylan Mulvaney's of this world, it's almost the same as doing blackface. The sort of image they portray of women is so vulgar, it's so crude. I'm on my period. Look at me falling over. It's disgusting. I hate it.
I must admit, I sort of sometimes think, well, you know, could we just send them over to Afghanistan instead and see how affirming they find it to be a woman there?
Right.
You know.
No, I totally agree. I'm really fascinated you're writing this book on pornography. We should definitely have you back on a separate segment to talk about that, because it's something that I've been looking into this myself for such a long period of time. And also, you know, what we don't talk about is the impact on men. You know, now when you look at rates, I was in a pharmacy the other day buying some cough mixture, big poster on the door saying 1 in 4 men under the age of 40 suffer from ED, erectile dysfunction. Again, a statistic that has massively exploded due to what? Pornography.
Yeah, of course it is, because they end up becoming stimulated by what they see, which escalates in the severity of what they're looking at, as it always does, because they need more to get the same, you know, to basically to reach orgasm, and they end up being kind of dead to the touch of another person, which is so tragic.
It is. We could talk about this all day. It's a subject, like I said, that I care deeply about, but we don't have time to. Thank you for going down that wormhole with me. Jo Bartosch there, assistant editor at The Critic, which is a brilliant publication. Some fascinating articles and columns and thought pieces on their website.